I'd like to reassure you this is the last time you're going to hear from me today, but you're going to hear from me one more time. Today, it's not the last time, so sorry, but I just want to be honest. This is a map of the approximate 3,000 sites across the US in 50 states and 2 territories that have PFAS contamination. In the US, we now know that 50 to 80% of the US waterways have some type of PFAS in them, and that almost 100% of the US population has been exposed to PFAS. Critically, the people that live, work, and play in these environments don't know how to protect themselves from the risk of PFAS. And as Sharon talked about previously, and I'm going to talk about through this talk, they're going to continue to be exposed to different PFAS for decades to come. 2 of the most common PFAS, PFOA, and PFOS, and there's approximately 12,000 PFAS out there, just so you know, have been linked to adverse outcomes such as testicular cancer, breast cancer, and kidney cancer. So today I'm going to share with you a study, The Devil They Knew, which was conducted by Dr. Nadia Gaber, Tracy Woodruff, and Lisa Barrow, and it's going to shine a light on how one of the greatest human and environmental disasters in the US/the world came to be. And as you heard from Sharon earlier today, this study focused on previously secret industry documents that were held by DuPont and 3M, who are the largest manufacturers of PFAS across the world, also known as forever chemicals. And it shows how the industry used tactics, which were developed by the tobacco industry, to undermine the science, suppress the science, and thus delay regulation. And I also have no conflicts to disclose. So developed in the 1940s, it was, I've missed some text in the middle, but don't worry. PFAS were initially developed for commercial and also military purposes. Talked about it earlier today. They are obviously part of a lot of stain-resistant and water-resistant products. They're also in Teflon pans and also in firefighting foam. They're incredibly mobile. They're found in the most remote regions of the world, in the Arctic and Pacific Oceans. They bioaccumulate. So they're found in apex predators. They work their way up the food chain, and they have the highest levels of PFAS in apex predators like seals and bears. And they're toxic, as I said before. They're well-established health effects. The other thing is that they persist. So even though exposures for things like PFOA and PFOS are no longer produced, people are still carrying PFOS and PFOA in their body. Touched on 3M DuPont as being the large players in this. 3M was the first to patent the signature chemical polytetrafluoroethylene, white waxy substance. Chemours, which is the spin-off of DuPont, claims it to be inert to virtually all chemicals and considered the most slippery substance in existence. And then the first to patent Teflon was DuPont back in 1945, and its products have been sold commercially since 1946. So this collection of documents, as you heard from Sharon, was gathered through litigation discovery by Robert Bellot, who was the first person to successfully sue DuPont for the harms of these chemicals. And they were donated to the UCSF Industry Documents Library, but also to the makers of the film The Devil We Know. The authors reviewed all 39 documents from 1961 to 2006, and they had 2 key objectives. The first one was to conduct a literature review of the scientific information on PFAS and identify and establish a timeline that showed the public knowledge on the chemical and the harms of it versus the industry's knowledge. The second thing they did was they used deductive codes that were adapted from published studies in the literature, detailing industry strategies to manipulate science, particularly the work, I think Tracy might have shown it at the start, of Lisa Barrow and Jenny White, which had 6 recurring themes that were identified, and they basically scaffolded the different strategies using this framework, or used this as a framework to put the strategies into the study. So you can see them here. Tracy touched on them before. I won't go through them again, but there's manipulation of the research question, funding and publishing the research, suppressing unfavourable research, which is a large part of this, distorting the public discourse, changing scientific standards, and disseminating favourable research to decision makers and the public instead of via the normal scientific process. So this is the results of their search of the database, and as you can see, little was publicly known about PFAS toxicity for the first 50 years it was used. It was considered biologically inactive until 2000. You can see the first hit around 1959, and then in 2011, you can see it goes up exponentially after a science panel, it's called the C8 Science Panel, released a report on the health effects of it, which was part of an earlier litigation. So again, like I said, the takeaway here is that there wasn't a lot of literature for the first 50 years. What you can see here now is an extended timeline following 5 different health outcomes down the left-hand side, showing when industry was aware of the toxicity of PFAS, and they're the orange boxes, and the information that was then available in the public domain. And one of the first times that industry was aware of PFAS or Teflon causing potential harms was Teflon's own chief of toxicology, in a report, discovered that Teflon materials had the ability to increase the size of the liver of small rats at low doses, and advised that the chemicals be handled with extreme care and that contact with the skin should be avoided, strictly avoided. And so this is in 1961. The authors then identified documents supporting industry strategies to influence science and policy in 5 of the 6 areas that I showed before. I'm only going to touch on 2 today for time's sake. And the first one I'm going to look at is suppression of unfavourable research. So you can see here, internal studies were identified from 1961 to 1994. Sorry it's in such small writing, but I just wanted to show you the breadth of the research. And these documents were often marked as confidential, or they actually were all marked as confidential. And in some cases, the company executives made the statement that they wanted memos destroyed. In addition to the company report I just mentioned, which you can see at the top of that box there in 1961, in 1970, an internal memo discussed DuPont's funded Haskell Laboratories. So you can see there in 1970, had found C8, also known as PFOA, to be highly toxic when inhaled and moderately toxic when ingested. Then in 1979, so just 2 bullets down, you can see in a private report from DuPont that Haskell Labs found that dogs that were exposed to a single dose of PFOA died within 2 days. The final one I want you to look at, I shouldn't have clicked on that, is just down at 1980. And this is one of the most egregious. In 1980, DuPont and 3M learned that 2 of 8 pregnant employees who had worked at the C8 manufacturing facility gave birth to children with birth defects, one with eye defects and a single nostril, and the other with eye and tear duct defects. In a third, PFAS was found in cord blood. Not only were these studies, or this information rather, not published, but they were not communicated to any employees at the time. In a follow-up study the very next year, conducted by 3M, of C8 exposure in pregnant rats in 1981, it was confirmed that the observed fetus eye changes were due to C8. I'm now going to touch on public discourse and how it relates to what I just presented then. Because following the internal surveys about the pregnant workers and the birth outcomes, DuPont decided to remove all the female workers from their facility, but they didn't make it aware that it was due to the findings that they'd identified. They made it look as if it was a precautionary approach. They also then made it known throughout the respective businesses that they had no available evidence of potential health effects due to C8 exposure. I can't read the last bullet at the bottom because it's too small, so I'm going to move on. But essentially, DuPont, when they found this information out about birth defects, didn't communicate it to the employees, but they also didn't report it to the US EPA, which they needed to do under the Toxic Substance Control Act, and they, like I said, made it out to look like they were moving people as a precautionary approach. This is Bucky Bailey, whose mother was one of the original women exposed to PFAS during pregnancy, and she was never told about those exposures, and she was moved to another position. So solutions, and this is very important because this is very specific to how we ensure these types of catastrophes don't reoccur. The first one is the production of chemical toxicity research should be done in the best interest of protecting the public's health. And what I mean by that is the questions that are asked, the funding of the research, but also the publishing of favourable and unfavourable results is critical. How we do that is really important. We need to increase funding for research in the public interest. And we need to use mechanisms whereby industry increases its contribution to the cost of toxicity research and other research. There's a really interesting example in Italy at the moment that's using the taxation from pharmaceutical industry, marketing and promotion to conduct efficacy and safety tests of their drugs. And so it's a model that certainly can be considered across all areas of research. And number 3 is to ensure that we don't have this suppression of research. It took 50 years to get this information out. Or health study protocols, so those who aren't academics, what that is, it's essentially the outline, the map of the study, who you're going to include in the study, what the outcomes are you're going to look at, and you need to make that publicly available before you go and conduct the study so that we can all see whether that study was published in full and completed. And if it's not, there's going to be obviously questions asked, so we at least have a record of that. And it's critical because at the moment we don't have that in the chemical space, in nutrition, in a lot of fields. So 3 key things that I think are critical, and I'm very much looking forward to the question and answer. I'll pass to Tracy. Thank you.